Hello, I'm Esther Gidou-Ewart. It's Thursday, April 13th. This is Africa 54. Global creditors, debtor nations, and international financial institutions agree to improve data sharing, setting clearer timetables, and other steps aimed at jump-starting debt restructuring processes. The 9th staging of the Africa FinTech Summit in Washington, D.C. wrapped up Wednesday with entrepreneurs from the continent saying they are excited to see the growth of the financial technology industry. VOA's Mike Hovey attended the summit and has our report. And U.S. President Joe Biden, who is in Ireland, his ancestral home, on Wednesday urged for the collapsed power-sharing government to be restored in a speech hailing 25 years of peace in the region under the Good Friday Agreement. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. We begin in Washington, D.C., where International Monetary Fund meetings are ongoing, and the IMF is declaring that 3 years after the COVID-19 outbreak, fiscal policy is returning to normal. VOA's Paul Ndiho has more.
The International Monetary Fund is sounding the alarm on increasing levels of global government debt, which is expected to reach unprecedented heights, mostly due to China and the United States. Public debt is predicted to increase at a faster rate than initially forecasted.
Despite having come halfway down from unprecedented levels reached in 2020, global public debt is more elevated and projected to grow faster than foreseen before the pandemic.
65% of countries beyond the lending group are already facing debt distress. So the IMF is urging action to either reduce or forgive debt for those countries.
IMF has as one of its priorities to contribute to ease those financing constraints, and it's calling on the global community and the community of creditors to act. One important aspect is to act on timely debt resolution. The G20 has the common framework to resolve these issues. It's important to have it working more expeditiously.
Financial market sources suggest that African countries need help in raising funds through the regional capital market as liquidity tightens, resulting in investors demanding higher interest rates. For instance, Ivory Coast was unable to issue local currency debt in March, and recently Senegal, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have cancelled or postponed issuing bonds. As a result, analysts say that governments may have to search for other alternatives, more affordable sources of financing, such as the IMF, to avoid budget shortfalls. Paul Ndiho, VOA News, Washington.
The 9th Africa FinTech Summit here in Washington has wrapped up with entrepreneurs from the continent saying they're excited to see the growth of the financial technology industry. VOA's Mike Hovey attended the event where entrepreneurs and founders of African startups interacted with global finance institutions and U.S. officials. Their discussions are likely to ensure more investment and the continuous growth of the fintech sector on the continent. Hovey spoke to Masi Eriawarien Sosu, one of the event's keynote speakers and the intensive manager at Halicon.
This summit for me is important because it places Africa at the center where she should be. It's important because it's bringing together ecosystem partners, giving them an opportunity to connect with one another. It's really important for ecosystem actors to be able to get together, be on the same page about the values that align. And for us, it's also important because it's an opportunity to connect with people who are also impact-driven focused.
Now, I'm really also curious. I know fintech has been regarded as the fastest growing sector on the continent. Considering all the challenges that we face, we've got infrastructure issues, network issues, etc. How is it still that fintech is the fastest growing sector?
I think part of the reason is that fintech answers a need to challenges that different African countries are facing. Even if you take, for example, M-Pesa and the fact that what M-Pesa was doing in Kenya and East Africa didn't even exist in the US at the time. I think it's kind of like that whole adage of necessity is the mother of invention. And I think in a lot of the startups in the fintech space are looking at what is needed and where the gaps are and the problems are. And it's kind of allowing us to and I hate to use the very common word, but kind of leapfrog where even Western countries are today.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's going to continue to be a fastest growing part of the economy.
In fact, Western leaders seem to be hailing Africa. I know Vice President Kamala Harris verbatim said Africa is the next place where digital innovation will be the big thing. How does that make creators and entrepreneurs like yourself feel?
I don't even think it should be said that it's the next place. It should be the place. And I'm very glad to hear that the U.S. government is saying that and supporting founders. I think that we need to kind of see more support.
Now, talk to me about how your institution is helping Africa's fintech sector grow.
So what we're doing is we provide community space and access. We provide training, leadership training. A lot of our fellows are, when they leave us, they always speak about how they've grown as a leader. We look at the way we support our fellows holistically. We don't just focus on the business, we focus on the person. So we provide them access to mentors where they get a chance to work with people one-on-one, go over their business models, learn their pitch, hone their pitch. A lot of our founders have not had to have had the same level of rigorous pitching that they undergo when they come to Halcyon. And they always complain, but by the time they're done their program, they're always very grateful that they had the opportunity to actually hone not just their pitch, but like tighten their business model. We also provide support in partnership with other actors like AWS, where we give them access to credits. And we provide a network of either investors, just our alumni community and all of that. And that's one of the ways that we like to come around our fellows and support them, not just while they're with us, but even into the future.
That was Mase Eriawarian Sosu, a keynote speaker at the 2023 Africa FinTech Summit and the Intensives Manager at Halcyon, speaking to VOA's Mike Hovey. A security official says Tunisia's Coast Guard has recovered 15 more bodies of migrants, bringing the death toll from a shipwreck off Tunisia to 25. A wooden boat packed with 110 migrants sank on Wednesday off the coast of the city of Sfax. 76 people rescued, while the rest are still missing. Drowning accidents off Tunisia have dramatically increased in recent weeks, leaving dozens dead and missing amid a sharp rise in migrant boats heading towards Italy from the Tunisian coast. Tunisia has overtaken Libya as a main departure point for people fleeing poverty and conflict in Africa in hopes of a better life in Europe. The United Nations doctors and officials say Congolese women and children have been raped and subjected to other abuses during a mass expulsion of migrant workers from Angola to Democratic Republic of Congo. UN figures show that Angola has deported thousands of workers in recent months, echoing previous purges over the past 12 years during which abuses also occurred. The size of the latest expulsion is not yet known, but 12,000 workers have passed through a border crossing near the Congolese town of Kamako in the past 6 months, according to the International Organization for Migration. South Africa's electricity minister says the country should not shy away from spending to correct the power crisis. Olivia Chan has more.
But we are faced with a crisis.
South Africa's electricity minister says the country should not shy away from spending to fix their power crisis. Kosienso Ramakopa was appointed last month to the newly created role to end the worst power blackouts on record. He spoke to Reuters less than 2 months after the National Treasury granted state utility Eskom over $13 billion of debt relief over the next 3 years.
So you need that emergency relief, which is your open cycle gas turbine. They come at great cost to the fiscus or the Eskom balance sheet, and we know that the Eskom's balance sheet really can't carry this.
Ramakopa said different interventions were needed, including investing in the capacity of the national grid and maintaining large outlays on diesel for Eskom's emergency open cycle gas turbines.
And one of the things we're proposing is that on all these big components, just go straight to the original equipment manufacturer. Don't have to go to my supplier database. I go straight, I'm going to procure from there. On the issues of coal, especially on the coal plus mines, so essentially Eskom has got an obligation to invest in the mines so that we are mining good quality coal. We must invest in those mines.
He said that if South African borrowing costs had to rise to fund diesel purchases, then that was a necessary trade-off, given the impact outages were having on unemployment and growth prospects. Ramakopa added grid constraints meant some renewable energy projects that had already been built were being throttled, and new projects were being jeopardized. The government cabinet will make a decision on his proposals later this month.
That was Olivia Chan of Reuters reporting. The instruction to feed the hungry is a common philosophy among most major world religions. Muslims are no exception, even while observing the fasting month of Ramadan. VOA's Irfan Ihsan reports.
Today's menu I have ground beef, alhamdulillah, and with chickpeas and vegetable.
On Sunday morning, right after his morning prayers, Syed Mazhar, a Bangladeshi American who lives just outside Washington, cooks up a feast. He doesn't cut back on the flavor.
Black pepper, turmeric, ginger. This is a mix of 5 spices, coriander, cumin.
This food is not for family or friends, but for DC area homeless.
Well, when we cook the food, we just don't randomly cook the food. We keep in our mind like what is good for them.
For Mazhar, this sharing of meals is an expression of his faith.
But also to represent who we are, Islam.
Mazhar is part of Food for Thought, a program run by the Virginia-based non-profit Amin Project, established in 2018 by Muslim American businessmen and entrepreneurs. Amin Project sprang from an app of the same name used to share information on Muslims who had passed away and needed prayer, along with a mosque locator for weekly Friday prayers. These days, it's a network of Muslim volunteers giving to those less fortunate, and they come from various national backgrounds. Farzal Ahmad is a volunteer from Pakistan.
If you're not a Muslim, if you eat good food and your neighbor stays hungry, he doesn't have food.
The group feeds people of all faiths, says Abdirizak Mohammed, a Somali American volunteer.
We like to give people without looking the background. If they are Christian or Jewish or whatever. People, when they are homeless, they don't have nobody take care of them.
Around 100 meals along with pastries and drinks are distributed in various parks around Washington, D.C., where homeless people reside. For Naila Sungkar, originally from Indonesia, this has become a family activity.
Untuk mengajarkan anak-anak kita, karena anak saya juga ikut terjun di Amin Project volunteer.
My kids are active in Amin Project as volunteers. I hope it also makes them realize they need to be thankful that they have everything they need.
The latest official figures say there are about 4,400 homeless people in Washington, D.C., lower than earlier pandemic heights, but still many who need regular food assistance. Irfan Ihsan, VOA News, Washington.
United Nations Chief Antonio Guterres says Somalia is suffering from the impact of a climate crisis it has done almost nothing to create. Edward Barron has the details.
Somalia is suffering from the impact of a climate crisis it has done almost nothing to create. That's according to United Nations Chief Antonio Guterres speaking on Wednesday, as a full-blown famine threatens to follow a drought that killed 43,000 people last year. Some 8.3 million Somalis, almost half the population, require urgent humanitarian assistance, Guterres said.
The 2023 humanitarian response plan, which seeks $2.6 billion is just 15% funded. When famine looms, this is totally unacceptable. The international community must step up and dramatically increase the volume of funds to support Somalia in this moment of difficulty.
He was speaking after visiting a camp in Baidoa, southwest Somalia, for people displaced by the drought and by fighting between Al-Shabaab, an Al-Qaeda affiliate, and government forces.
It is unconscionable that Somalis who have done almost nothing to create the climate crisis are suffering its terrible impact.
After 5 consecutive failed rainy seasons, the droughts displaced 1.4 million Somalis, with women and children making up 80% of them, he said. The Integrated Food Security Phase classification, which sets the global standard for determining the severity of a food crisis, said last December that famine had been temporarily averted, but warned the situation was getting worse.
That was Edward Barron of Reuters reporting. We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and all our VOA Africa programs on our website at voaafrica.com. Still to come, U.S. President Joe Biden urges the collapsed Northern Ireland power-sharing government to be restored. We'll be right back.
In its different forms is not only a source of joy and entertainment, but also one of the most powerful tools to advance social change. African societies are increasingly using art to raise consciousness and incentivize people to address social issues and promote peace. On this week's episode of Our Voices, we will hear from experts on how art can improve social, cultural, and economic dynamics among societies. Join the conversation each week right here on Our Voices.
In other news, South Africa's government says former fugitive Thabo Bester, who faked his own death in a prison break, has been extradited from Tanzania. Justice Minister Ronald Lamola says Bester and a woman, a Mozambican national with whom he is reportedly romantically involved, have been returned to South Africa. A closely watched malaria vaccine from Oxford University has secured its first approval in Ghana as the African country ramps up efforts to combat the mosquito-borne disease that kills a child every minute. The Oxford vaccine, which has secured approval in the age group at the highest risk of death from malaria, children 5 months to 3 years. And a severe drought in North Africa has left Tunisian farmers bracing for a catastrophically poor harvest and jeopardizing food security. One Tunisian wheat farmer describing the situation says he's never seen a drought this bad. He says it's been dry for the last 4 years and production is at zero and the situation is unsustainable. U.S. President Joe Biden met his Irish counterpart on Thursday as he continued a 3-day trip around his ancestral homeland. A proud Irish-American, President Biden was welcomed by President Michael Higgins and his wife Sabina Coyne at their residence in Dublin. On Wednesday in Belfast, Northern Ireland, Biden urged for the collapsed power-sharing government to be restored. VOA White House Bureau Chief Patsy Widakuswara has more.
For an American president who loves to highlight his Irish heritage, it was a homecoming.
Every time I've come, the welcome, the people on the streets, they're just so gracious to us.
Thousands of people lined up to catch a glimpse of Joe Biden.
Even though it's raining in Ireland, the sun's shining really in our hearts. And there's no show like a Joe show.
Biden toured Carlingford Castle, the last Irish landmark his great-great-grandfather Owen Finnegan saw as he sailed for New York in 1849. Biden spoke with locals, retelling the story of Finnegan and Joseph Kearney, former President Barack Obama's great-great-grandfather, both shoemakers from nearby counties who emigrated to the U.S. around the same time.
In all their dreams, I'm not sure they could have imagined that 175 years later, both their great-great-grandsons would be President of the United States of America, Barack Obama and Joe Biden.
Earlier Wednesday, across the border in Belfast, Northern Ireland, Biden hailed 25 years of peace under the Good Friday Agreement that ended the conflict over whether the region should unify with Ireland or remain part of the United Kingdom. He urged for the power-sharing government that has collapsed under boycott and political infighting to be restored.
As a friend, I hope it's not too presumptuous of me to say that I believe democratic institutions established through the Good Friday Agreement remain critical to the future of Northern Ireland.
If power sharing is restored, he suggested more investments from American companies will come, a message echoed by British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak.
We talked about the investment potential that is there, the companies that want to invest in Northern Ireland. I think that's incredibly exciting. It will bring growth, jobs and prosperity to Northern Ireland, and I know he shares my ambition to see the institutions here back up and running. That's what people and businesses in Northern Ireland deserve.
On Thursday, Biden holds talks with Irish leaders, ending his trip with a Friday night speech in Ballina, home of his paternal ancestors on the west coast of Ireland. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News, Washington.
U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin says that Ukraine remains confident about its planned counteroffensive against invading Russian forces, despite the emergence of apparently classified U.S. intelligence documents on the war. VOA senior diplomatic correspondent C.D. Sen reports.
As the war grinds on in Ukraine, top U.S. officials are seeking to contain the damage from the surfacing of highly classified military documents on the war. The documents include briefing slides mapping out Ukrainian military positions and U.S. assessments of its allies' support for Kyiv. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin told reporters Tuesday no one knows for sure right now where these documents came from.
We take this very seriously, and we will continue to investigate and turn over every rock until we find the source of this and the extent of it.
Asked whether Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky should alter his plans for an expected spring counteroffensive against Russia, Austin had this to say.
They will fight the enemy and not be driven by a specific plan. They have a great plan to start, but only President Zelensky and his leadership really know the full details of that plan.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was asked about the damage the leaks might cause to the trust of U.S. allies to share intelligence in the future.
Let me just say, with regard to broadly allies and partners and these documents, we have engaged with allies and partners at high levels over the past days, including to reassure them about our own commitment to safeguarding intelligence and, of course, our commitment to our security partnerships.
One of the more damaging leaks pertained to the U.S. and its ally, South Korea.
One of the leaks was that the U.S. was apparently listening to conversations inside the South Korean government, trying to figure out where the South Koreans going to finally agree to sell ammunition to us that we could either directly give to Ukraine or that we could be used to replace what we gave to Ukraine. So it was this, in that case, I believe it was us listening to the South Korean government, trying to understand what they were thinking.
Another expert told VOA that the leak is not as bad as others in the past, but there is one aspect that he is worried about.
The one risk, I would say, is the use of this intelligence for information operations or for even disinformation. So we've already seen examples of certain PowerPoint slides with numbers and figures being released, and then seeing a similar PowerPoint slide with the numbers altered or changed to suit a certain narrative. So then you're going to have this big question about the authenticity of not the initial leak, but of all the documents that are going to now be floating around.
Ukraine's defense ministry has accused Russia of being behind the leaks. Intelligence experts say the leaked document with casualty numbers was altered to cut the number of Russian soldiers killed by more than half, before surfacing on pro-Russian Telegram channels. A Kremlin spokesperson said Moscow was well aware that the United States and NATO were involved in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine before the leak surfaced. Cindy Sain, VOA News.
Sudan has a rich archaeological history, boasting more pyramids than Egypt. At the University of Khartoum, women archaeologists are set to dominate the field, with more than 90% of archaeology students now female. Henry Wilkins reports from Khartoum.
While Egypt might be the first place that springs to mind when it comes to pyramids, follow the Nile River further south to Sudan and you'll discover Meroe. They're arguably Sudan's most important archaeological treasure, and now female archaeologists are set to take the reins of studying them. Lina Hatem Ahmed is an archaeology student at the University of Khartoum.
In Africa and in Sudan, people are not aware of the importance of archaeology. Studying it is fun. We're enthusiastic about it, and it makes up a part of a rounded education. Archaeology subfields, too, help us develop a view of the world.
Yahya Fadil Daha leads the university's archaeology department, where 27 of 30 students are women. Women, he notes, often score higher in entrance exams.
The majority of students are females. Historically, women have always been a part of Sudanese life, and just like they were during the Meroitic civilization, they are participating in our civilization today.
According to the UN, Sudanese women suffer multiple forms of discrimination and inequality. Some female students say they have had to overcome preconceived notions of gender roles to get into archaeology.
I meet some people that don't support my studies and keep telling me that this is against our traditions and religious beliefs. For example, they say, how can you travel to exhume bodies? So objections come from a lack of understanding.
But she says her family has always been supportive of her work. Fatma Abdurrahman says her family does not support her going on field trips outside of Khartoum and forbids her taking longer trips, which are often needed.
My family doesn't have a problem if I work nearby, but they definitely say no if I have to be away from home for a month. Also, working further afield is really difficult and tiring because we work for a full day, and in some places there is no internet or connection, so I can't communicate with my family.
Nonetheless, she hopes to continue her studies and become an archaeological tour guide so she can play a part in introducing Sudan's rich history to more people. Henry Wilkins for VOA News, Khartoum, Sudan.
Thank you for joining us on Africa 54. See you tomorrow.